Okay, Gamar Tov, everyone. Gamar Chatima Tova, a good sealing. Please, God, in the book of life. It's not easy to give a sermon immediately after intense Yizkor, but do our best. And, my style, I like to offer something a little lighter, so I know it's not going to be easy to offer after Yizkor, but hang with me here. Okay. I feel like this sermon I got to give here on this Yom Kippur, on this Day of Atonement, Day of Kapara, Rabbi Jay said, should be on the one hand, you're going to be like, duh, Rabbi, this is like so obvious. It's such an obvious message. One would think it's an obvious message. But we clearly have a tension going on in our society today around this issue. Maybe some confusion about what is the clear, what I would consider Jewish Torah message about the issues of apologies, of offering apologies, of the willingness to say one is sorry, that this is considered of the highest Jewish values. If you consider the biggest day on our calendar is the day where essentially we're saying sorry all day, you get the point of what the Jewish take is on apologies. But let me just frame what I think is the tension going on here, the interesting moment, and do this to a little bit of a story. I want to credit one of my children for giving this nice story to me a couple months ago. So, some of you, I'm sure very few in Beth Meyer, but in the world, there is something called ultimate fighting, or they call it mixed martial arts. If you don't know what it is, it's the next stage, kind of, boxing, okay? And in this thing, you go into a cage, and there are fighters, and they're basically, within some limitations, allowed to really go after each other with blood and gore. I admit, my father, he's probably watching, he's a lover of boxing. I have appreciation for boxing. I'm not a huge fan of the ultimate fighting, but some of you will know the champion, or was champion, is a guy from Ireland named, I'm going to mess it up, Conor McGregor. Everyone knows Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor. In fact, he's famous for he walks like this. If you've seen it, anyway, I can tell from your response, you don't know who he is. If you know who he is, you know who he is, okay? Conor McGregor is famous, and he is well known. He has a kind of Muhammad, for those who know Muhammad Ali, may rest in peace, Muhammad Ali ability to speak in ways that really fire up, upset. We'll just say that arrogance is something that he has a PhD in, okay? He can upset people with what he says left and right. And over the past, believe it or not, in the Jewish year, although he's not Jewish, don't worry, okay? He became the champion not only of one weight class, but of two weight classes. The first champion to do that in mixed martial arts at one time. You're going to be like, Rabbi, why are you telling me this story? Just wait. And in the course of promoting these fights, this guy is a multi-zillionaire. He's done very, very well, okay? He says really provocative, hurtful, offensive things to his opponents. And some of you know, like do the weigh-in. He's the kind of guy that will go and try to fight during the weigh-in. He's incredibly provocative, okay? Now, he'd done so many terrible things and said so many things. And a few of the children in my house tend to watch some of the clips of these things, okay? And they can say, but you got to see this, what Conor McGregor said now. You won't believe it, blah, 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 blah. So, he says all these terrible things. He finally wins the second fight. He becomes the only fighter at that time that had won two weight classes in the history of mixed martial arts. He had spoken horribly, disgustingly to all of his opponents, and he takes the microphone at the end of the match in front of millions of people, mostly watching on pay-per-view TV, and he says, I want to take this moment in front of everyone after I've won this championship. I want to take this opportunity to apologize. And I turned to my son Adi. I said, see, sweetie, finally he saw the light. He said, I want to take this moment to apologize to absolutely nobody. Gavalt Hashem, take me now, okay? I was like, sweetie, don't listen to that, okay? Now, he does that. Let's just be clear. I don't think he brings that home to his wife. I don't know if he's married, by the way, because that's not going to work very well, okay? Because this idea, I'll apologize to absolutely nobody, it's a show. It's a show. It's meant to entertain. If he really believes that, then that's another opinion I have about him, all right? He does it to irk people. But this idea seems to be prevalent even in 57, 81, 82, that somehow apologizing is weak or groveling or unmasculine in that gender dynamic, whatever that might be, right? That somehow apologizing is something that weak people do. It's not what strong people do. Now, I want to be so crystal clear about this because just before Yom Kippur, the new prime minister of the state of Israel, Naftali Bennett, who in a phone call, tragically, if you follow Israeli news, it happened in the past few days. There was an Israeli soldier who sadly was killed in a terrorist kind of attack, a fight, basically a battle fight on the Gaza border. And in the phone call with the father of the deceased son, by accident, Prime Minister Bennett said the name incorrectly of the deceased soldier. And when he did it, he immediately realized and apologized. And later, when he was questioned about by the media, right before Yom Kippur, he said, I apologize. I apologize then, and I apologize again for the horrible mistake of my leadership and conduct in that moment. There seems to be no problem with the prime minister of our state of Israel apologizing. And not only that, this past year, some of you remember, get a little bit into contemporary politics. There was a moment this past year, or year-ish, again, Jewish year, when a former President Trump went to do a visit to the local church outside the White House, if you remember that experience, when he held a Bible in front of the church, and next to him was the Joint Chief of Staff, Mark Milley. Mark Milley, if you look at I Googled it because I want to make sure I got it right for the sermon. He has so many medals on his thing, I think it would droop down like this, including 3 bronze medals for valor for fighting in war zones. And he stood by former President Trump while this experience happened in uniform, if you remember. After it was over, he gave a video, commencement address to one of the academies where he was going to just give a commencement address. But at the beginning of it, he decided, after reflection, that he was going to apologize. He said, I should have never been in full uniform present in that place. There should be a clear distinction between the military and its commitments and political leadership. I should not have been there. It was an error, but that what I represented was wrong, and I apologize. And he was attacked by certain people that said, to quote, make sure I get this right here, that this was an embarrassing and groveling apology. I've never seen this general grovel and be weak and embarrassing. Instead, he did what great Jewish leaders did and do, is he stood up and he apologized. That is the right behavior. That is the Jewish behavior. That is the Torah behavior. I'm going to give you just 2 examples of this that one I think is kind of quite obvious for Yom Kippur, and one you might be a little less connected to or less familiar with because it's back in the aspect of the Tanakh that you may have not read as closely because it's not as risen up. But I want to bring 2 examples. One on Yom Kippur itself, just read in the Torah portion for for Yom Kippur. It says, we would offer these sacrifices up in the tabernacle, etc. Eventually it was at the temple in Jerusalem. We offered sacrifices. And it says the high priest, who's in charge of the entire day, wearing special clothing, white clothing, going and representing the entirety of the Jewish people before God, he goes, and it says first, before he asks for forgiveness for the entire Jewish people for our sins, he first asks forgiveness for himself in his sins, and for his household. Now you think, well, that's such a big deal. But back then, if you look at the Torah, he was offering his prayers in front of hundreds of thousands of people. So basically, he's getting up in front of 100,000 people and saying, I messed up this year. My family messed up this year. And I'm not ashamed to put that in front of everybody. The high priest, close to God, is a human being like everybody else who makes mistakes. And it's no problem for him to apologize. That's one example. Another one, and this is the one I want to bring home strong, is King David. You know, there are 3 classic kings in ancient Israel. Saul was the first, David was the second, and the third was the absolute best. Solomon. You guys know? Okay, all right, Solomon. All right. There are more kings. Those are 3 classic beginning of the kingdom, of the Commonwealth, all right?
King David, who's famous, King David, he beat Goliath. King David, his famous gingy red hair. He played musical instruments. He wrote the book of Psalms. He's a poet. He's a shepherd. Psalm 23. He is like King David, David Melech Yisrael. We sing songs about David Melech Yisrael. He's unbelievably honored. But King David did not always do such kosher things, okay? If you look in the book of Samuel, it's not in the Torah, it's in the prophetic section. Second book of Samuel, King David one day is out in the palace enjoying himself, looks over in Yerushalayim down, and he sees a beautiful woman down there bathing. Not much clothing on, by the way, okay? He says, I want this one. Not very nice, by the way. Not a very, not a very Me Too moment, especially, okay? Says, finds out she's married. Who's she married to? Uriah. Who's Uriah? Uriah is like the Army Rangers, Navy SEALs of the ancient Israel army. And his advisor said, what are you doing? You can't. First of all, she's married. Second of all, she's married to like your top soldier, your top people. He's like, no, I'll take care of it. He sends the soldiers off to war. I'm fast forwarding here. And he puts Uriah in the front of a war that is going to be potentially lost. And he directs all the soldiers to pull back and leave him alone to be killed, which he is. He then marries Bathsheba. That's her name, Bathsheba, by the way. And they have a family. And in a family. They're together and married, and they have a family. It's true. But the bottom line is one day his friend, a prophet named Natan, comes to him one day and basically says to him through a parable. You should read it. It's a great story, powerful story. There's a guy who's acting terribly, and he's stolen from someone else. What should happen? And King David says, he should be attacked. If someone steals, they should have the consequences. And Natan says, you're the man who stole. You stole this woman from Uriah. You killed him. You're liable. You're responsible. And King David in that moment doesn't say, oh, it's weak and groveling to apologize. I'm being too embarrassed. I'm a king. I don't need to apologize. He says, Chatati Ladonai. Right in front of his Natan, in front of his family, in front of all the people, Chatati Ladonai, which means I sinned. Al chet chatati. Before God, I sinned. It's very interesting, by the way. It doesn't say I sinned before Uriah, or I sinned before Bathsheba, or I sinned before my parents, which is all true. He says I sinned before God, and the commentary on that is because he did sin before God. When you sin before people, you also sin before God. You can't come to Yom Kippur and say, well, I'll work out my stuff with people later. I'll only work out with God on Yom Kippur. No. Your relationship with God and your relationship with people is all intertwined. So when he says I sin before God, what he's really saying is I sin before all of God's creatures. I sin before too many people to name. And I am most embarrassed that I've done this before God as the King of Israel. And I apologize. So I think I've made it pretty clear that if King David can apologize and the high priest can apologize, then I'm not so in the camp of Conor McGregor and his Michigas, okay? But I want to come back and say why this touched me so much this year. Because I'm sure a lot of you are saying, of course, Rabbi, we should apologize. This is the Jewish way. I get it. You made your point. Okay, we'll move on. Well, hold on, okay? Because this past year, I had a very profound experience, people in our shul, where I realized that I think this issue needs some deeper evaluation because I'm worried. I'm concerned. How do I know? It's anecdotal. But I want to be sure that everyone here understands that this apology is not theoretical. It's each and every one of us. Rabbis, doesn't matter who you are, leaders, everybody's responsible for being able to apologize and willing to apologize. How did this happen? So some of you know, and sadly, or actually it's been a privilege, but when someone is dying, when they're in their last breath, if possible, and it's not always possible, but if it's possible, there's something called the vidui and the final shema. The vidui is very similar to Yom Kippur. It's a final confession that the person who is near death, called in Hebrew a goses, ideally can recite for themselves. But of course, that rarely happens. And what happens is me or Rabbi Jenny, we come with the family, if it's possible. Again, the timing doesn't always happen this way, but if it does, and we, on their behalf, offer the vidui. We say, on your behalf, we apologize. We for the following sins, and it's kind of there's a set formula, but we add to it as well. We also have the person forgive the people around for things that happen that are unresolved. So it's an issue of forgiveness and apology that all happens at that end. So I had one of these experiences this past year under COVID, but we still made it with masks. Went down to the Transitions Hospice, if you guys know, off Wade Avenue over there, at a very holy place. And we're there, and I offer these prayers, and it is powerful, and we're there, and the person that is near death, he's unconscious. So the prayers conclude, which is very common. I'm crying, they're crying, and we know that he has little time left. It ended up being a few more hours. After it was over, one of the daughters was crying so hysterically, so strong, that I tried to console her. I mean, in a way, how do you console with COVID? But, trying to console, trying to show some support, trying to show some understanding. And she said to me, Rabbi, I'm not just crying because my father is about to die. I'm not just crying because we had this incredibly powerful experience here. I said, well, why? I'm crying because this is the first time in my life that my father ever apologized to me. I said, she said, exactly. So I bring this home to you, to all of us. We have limited time on this earth. None of us is perfect. There is nothing weak or groveling, embarrassing about making a mistake and saying you're sorry. And the time to say you're sorry is now. Not, sadly, when Rabbi Jenny and I are there doing it on your behalf. We all have a choice to make this Yom Kippur. Do we want to be like the high priest? Do we want to be like King David? Or do we want to be like an idiot like Conor McGregor? The choice is obvious. It's obvious. In the ring between Conor McGregor and King David. Conor McGregor. So be like King David. Be like the high priest. It's no big deal. And in fact, you will be seen on Yom Kippur modeling the highest Jewish behavior for yourself, for the people you love, and for other generations. They'll know you stood up for what matters. You were strong because you apologized, not weak. May we all, with God's help, have the strength to apologize to all those we may have hurt this year, and any year, this Yom Kippur and going forward. Gamar.